and welcome to Hub's webinar, The Wellness Effect. Energize your workforce with well-being initiatives that drive engagement and boost productivity. Today we'll be talking about wellness in the workplace, or wellness in the workforce, since many organizations are hybrid. We'll include strategies for designing a culture of well-being that will help you energize your workforce, boost retention, and drive productivity. Now, we appreciate the time you've set aside today to attend this event. So before we jump into our topic, I've got a few housekeeping items to cover. First, we're recording this webinar, and we're going to send you a link to the recording so that all registrants will have it in the next few days. And a copy of the slides, they're really good slides, you'll want them, we'll send those to you. You can submit questions during the presentation in the questions section in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. We'll try to address them in the Q&A section near the end of the presentation, or we'll try to scoop them up as we're going along. And if we don't get to your question, a Hub representative will follow up with you. After the webinar, you'll see a survey pop up before exiting. Please take a few minutes to fill it out, or rather seconds. We greatly appreciate your feedback. It helps us be even better next time. And remember, the human brain isn't actually capable of multitasking. In fact, it has been linked to lower levels of retention and happiness. So consider this your first wellness tip. All right, on with the show. I am Philip Swayze. I'm a Vice President of Health and Performance at Hub International. And accompanying me today are my esteemed colleagues, Leslie Sheffield, a rising star in our National Health and Performance Consulting team, and former H&P consultant turned regional strategist, the amazing Sarah Collins, who's an AVP of Employee Benefits. All right, let's jump in to our presentation. Here's our agenda for today. We are gonna just lay out some definitions and talk about our belief model because we believe that's important. And then framing out what do best practices in the workplace look like. As we think about those best practices, they include strategic planning, organizational and leadership support, programs and program integration, participation strategies, and then we'll close out with measurement and evaluation. And throughout the presentation, we're also going to be offering case studies and specific examples just to help these frameworks come alive for you. So definitions of workforce well-being. Well, of course, health improvement is the foundation. That's why we're here. That's why you're here. So if we think about the strategic consulting model that we use at Hub, and certainly one that should look familiar to you, the elements of well-being that we see on the left-hand side, we'll talk a little bit about, but we're really focusing more on the strategic consulting pieces. So if we think about what is well-being and how to create a tangible wellness effect, it's all of those pieces on the side pulled into the framework we're going to share. Now, remember, the state of being happy, healthy, or prosperous is how Merriam-Webster defines it. And so we look at, again, all of those aspects on our left-hand side and realize, as the World Health Organization says, health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So that's important. We're going to dive into some ideas and some data around what, looking at claims and risk data. That's important. We want to make sure that we're identifying people who are really struggling, but it's also making sure that we're helping people to thrive. And as you think about the bottom of the right-hand side, right, belongingness, employee experience, employee engagement, Sarah's going to talk about some of those later. Population health management, shared trust and purpose, right? We're going to hashtag all of that stuff because those are critical elements, as well as the programs that come as part of that. And certainly at Hub, we believe that good benefits, employee-friendly policies, effective wellness programming, and authentic communication, those are what drive a quality employee experience and create and influence trust and engagement, which is important if you want people to engage in your programs. So moving forward, as we think about population health and wellness, we're focused on that first goal. We want to keep the healthy people in that healthy category. That's where you spend the smallest dollars. If we look at that middle category in the second goal, it's addressing people with chronic risks. Maybe they're overweight or they're tobacco users, hypertension, right? Like those are high functioning people who we want to help to be a healthier version of themselves and move them down the risk continuum. And as we look at that far right-hand side, like it's not that the well-being initiative doesn't care about those people. It's that in general, the services that might come through benefits or wellness, we really want to may be insufficient. And so we want to direct them to the care system. And I'll point out that this data is pulled from our book of business and our analytics platform, and it really just helps to show benchmarking what individuals within these risk strata will cost you. All right, let's dive into those best practices, shall we? First, what's important is an integrated approach to health and well-being improvement, right? Career and growth may seem like an outlier here as we're talking about workforce wellness, but if you're also talking about employee engagement, this is where you're employed and you really care about that stuff. I know that I do. Health and energy is solidly in that wellness space, right? What we are, the sleep that we're getting and the foods that we're consuming, that's important. Culture and connection, we know from the research on isolation and loneliness, help us to understand how critically important that is. It's not just something that Maslow talked about. Money and security, of course, has always been a facet of that, and financial well-being and is critically important. Productivity, both the employee and the employer care about that, right? Good employees who have some of these other elements, they care about that. They want to show up as their best selves. And you'll see how communication and engagement bring it all together, because we know that this is interconnected. And certainly that's why we have the folks with me on the phone today. And when you're working with your consulting team, hopefully they're bringing a number of different specialists to the table to make sure that you're connecting all the dots that make up, the fabric of great health and well-being. So a little bit about best practice frameworks. What's on the slide here is from the Healthiest Employers. There's likely some of you who have taken this assessment and maybe won some awards. It's available in many states, and oftentimes they'll require you to purchase reporting, which is where I culled this data. And so I'm not going to go through the observations I came up with or really spend a lot of time on the data. What I draw your attention to is the left-hand side of the graphic that shows the 6 elements of best practice. And the other piece I would say is you look at where the shifts are, that for the most part, employers are becoming more sophisticated in the way that they're addressing workforce well-being. Now on this next slide is the HERO best practice framework, and this is where we sort of planted our flag at Hub. You'll see that those elements on the left-hand side are pretty closely associated with what you get with Springbuck's Healthiest Employers. If you're familiar with the CDC scorecard or Health Next, a lot of them are sort of playing the same tune. Strategic planning, organizational support, which are starred, have an outsized impact on what you're doing. And the box on the right-hand side really shows how the research that HERO has done, looking at scorecard respondents year over year, organizational leadership support is top in the charts. And looking forward to Sarah to talk some more about that as we dig into that section. And before we transition to strategic planning, if you're looking for something to share with your CEO or your CFO, organizations that invest in a meaningful way in the well-being of their workforce, as you can see on the left-hand side, outperforming the stock market. So publicly traded companies who have completed the scorecard, Coop Award winners, or corporate health achievement, they've mapped their stock price over a 10-year period. And what you can see that of all the squiggly lines, the purple line is the S&P 500. Those companies within those 3 different research studies outperform the stock market. And then if you move over to firms of endearment, now conscious capitalism, evolving into healing organizations, really the story there is if you invest not only in your people, but in all of the stakeholders that surround your organization that you will just crush the S&P 500 and the good to great companies. So I think that's pretty cool. Okay, let's move into the structures of best practices. Strategic planning. No plan, no progress, right? The Carpenter's adage suggests that we should measure twice and cut once, right? Makes a lot of sense to us as we think about how we like to frame out strategic planning for our clients. We start with a big picture wellness mission and vision, right? And so we want to map out something that speaks to people's minds, but also to their hearts. And then as we want to get into the details, right, we got to have the data. So you develop objectives. These should be measurable objectives that are meaningful to your organization. And if you achieve them, will help to support business goals. The four elements below are most closely aligned with programs, services, and benefits that are within your organization. And I stole these from one of my clients. Mid-sized, self-funded employer, strong leadership support, doing really great things for their workforce. And so you can see here, we're really just taking benefits, but also third-party services, and we're mapping them into this structure that helps you to understand where the pieces lay and how your stuff fits in. As we get into, some of the elements of this with strategic planning, you got to create a budget, right? And you can use carrier dollars. Make sure you ask your carrier for that at renewal. And then, I would say a meaningful investment of time will have a greater impact than money, right? It's just like on Valentine's Day, spend time with your honey. It's better than just handing them a box of chocolates, or do both. Really, that's ideal. When it comes to data sources, if you're a small employer out there and you're trying to create strategy, and I know we had a question about creating strategy, you can create benchmarks using surveys. Every company is collecting data. Think about what data you have that connects to some of the things that you're trying to accomplish, and make sure that what you're doing is connected to the outcomes of your organization. The next piece, right, make sure you have clear, consistent, relevant communications, right? Those are super important. Those surveys I talked about will get the voice of the consumer. As we look at organizational leadership support, it needs to match the story and connect to the engagement of the organization. And so we have a couple ideas here that I've written out. I don't need to read to you. I wanted to ask, Sarah, to sort of chime in, because I know, Sarah, you've got some great ideas about policy and organizational leadership support.
Yeah, thanks, Philip. So one of the things when you see on the screen, creating policies that remove barriers and align with workplace wellness. So when you think about that, looking at your internal policies and procedures can be really the low-hanging fruit of your employee engagement strategy. So for example, opening up time away from work language to be more inclusive along with removing the legal ease can boost your engagement and job satisfaction by removing those barriers. So that's a really great example of what you can do around your policies and tie that to well-being.
Love that. All right, thank you, Sarah. So moving forward into this next category, organizational leadership support, refer you back to the research data, the #1 most influential element. And for fans of Peter Drucker, and I don't know, that's probably the way he always looked. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? It's classic. I've seen this on people's websites. It's certainly one that I quote because I think it's important. But I want to step aside and bring in someone who looks a whole lot happier than our friend Peter Drucker here, my friend Sarah.
Perfect. Yeah, so the first thing here we're going to talk about is creating a human-centric workplace. So what does that mean? Creating a culture where the employee is truly at the center. So when I say employee, I mean all employees, right? A lot of times we focus on just the employees downline, but this is leaders and leadership included. So humanizing your workforce from the top down shows really that your organization cares about your people, and they are more than a number on a census or a line on the payroll report. The perk of this really can range everywhere from boosting employee well-being and satisfaction to retention and recruitment. everyone is looking for top talent, right? The competition is fierce. It's been fierce. It's not getting any better. And the best way to shine as an organization and be able to keep and grow your talent is going to be looking at as an employer of choice while also growing everyone inside your organization. So some quick stats I want to share with you on what it means when you create a human-centric workplace. Some of these really blow me away, honestly. So the one at the top, talking about employees are 4 times more likely to be high performing, and also the one that they are 3 times more likely to show low levels of fatigue. So when we talk about low levels of fatigue, we're talking about the burnout factor. We're really, truly talking about how do you fight that burnout factor that we're all struggling with every single day. Shifting over to retention. So one of the things that we're constantly asked about as consultants and experts in our field is employee retention. So when I look at client data, the normal population split is looking at almost 50% millennial. I know on the screen you see the millennials occupy 35% of the US labor force, but what I'm seeing in my area of expertise is really pushing 50%. I am an elder millennial, so this topic is near and dear to me. One of the things that I always share is that millennials are no longer your new entrants. So they're no longer figuring out how to do this thing we call life. They are your leaders in your workplace and in your communities. So when you're thinking about what they're doing, they're also leading all the generations. And they have a lot going on in their personal lives and in their work lives because they're growing their careers. Things are changing and shifting constantly because of the age range that they fall in. There's actually a new generation that we call Zennials, and they are squished in between the Gen X's and the Millennials. So they're really looked at as sandwich generation, and that is because they can have young children and aging parents, and they tend to not take really good care of themselves. So understanding that and seeing what you're looking at in your population is really important. So how do we keep them? How do we help them and ensure that we're keeping our talent in the organization? So some tips that we have and some ideas that we are always talking about is flexibility is huge. So scheduling, having flexible schedules, working from home, working from someplace else, which has been a newer thing since COVID. Really, if you can, work from a different space, you don't have to necessarily be at home, and just making sure you're getting your work completed. And then mentorship. So the teach me and let me teach. The traditional and reverse mentorship thought process is really, really impactful with the millennial workforce, and honestly, any workforces inside your organization. And then we're talking about balance again. Yes, work-life balance is possible. It just really takes a team effort and discipline on everyone's side to make sure that you can create a culture that has work-life balance.
So I love that, Sarah. And we have a question that came in that says, for businesses that now have a $20 minimum wage, what creative things can you offer without adding cost? What matters to those younger workers at 17 to 21? And I think you shared a few here. Any other thoughts about creative ways to address that younger workforce?
Yeah, honestly, we're all learning about that younger workforce. Later on in a couple slides, I'm going to be talking about generations, the Generation Zs, which is that generation that you're mentioning, and how we are figuring out what they need in the workplace and how they like to be communicated to. So that is a huge thing that is being newly uncovered. We're all curious about how to engage those employees and how to communicate with them. So I will talk a little bit about that in a second.
Awesome, love that. And I'll just throw in this category, gratitude wall. Who doesn't love some gratitude, right? Whether you're young or you're older, gratitude always delivers. So
Absolutely.
thank you.
So shifting into engagement. So the return on investment of your employee engagement. Once we take some time to create a human-centric workplace, what are we going to get out of that as an organization? There has to be something in it for everybody. So when we talk about ROI, which is the return, VOI, which is the value, what is that return and what really is that value? So later on today, Leslie's going to talk about that too, but I want to show how ROI and VOI ties in and what it does for you as an organization. So we're getting back to that sense of belonging, right? We're getting back to what drives retention, the humanization of the workforce, showing that we truly care about the employee in and out of work. That is the big thing too. So we recognize that you're an employee inside of work, and we also recognize that you're an actual human being and we're seeing the whole person. All we're creating what we call at Hub a quality employee experience, or QEX. So we'll talk about that in a second. And there's some stories that we help create when we talk about employees being happy at work. So those stories really stick with people. So when you're working on employee engagement as an organization, you're creating that sense of belonging. Those are the things that people will take with them for the rest of their lives and really make an impact. It's really no secret that employee engagement can come with a pretty price tag. So we're looking at engagement on a budget. It doesn't have to be expensive. You can use all kinds of things to narrow your need and figure out what truly is going to make an impact on your employees. You can pick apart your current benefits and see what's buried inside of those. There's all kinds of programs, value adds that sometimes we just have no idea exist. And my favorite thing is picking apart your workforce and understanding what those things that are laying inside your employees from a talent and a strength that you don't know that they have, that is really going to help grow your organization and boost everyone up. So that is one huge thing that helps organizations win, is when you are really truly understanding what makes your workforce tick and what they want to do and what they love to do and how you can take that out and help boost your employee engagement. So creating a quality employee experience. So all of this is starting to tie together, right? So we go through so many experiences in life, and when we combine all of that with work and our careers, everything gets mashed together and the lines start to get pretty blurry. We all have this similar goal. We want to feel happy and successful in what we're doing, but life tends to get in the way. At Hub, we call these life quakes, things that are happening to you every single day, in and out of work. Multiple things can happen at once. And what we think about from an employer perspective is it's happening from onboarding all the way to offboarding. And we need to remember that there's more than one life quake happening at the same time. And if we multiply across that all the employees in an organization, that's an awful lot of life quakes happening to employees that we have to figure out a way to get them some resources and some help. So by looking at your data in a different way, you can really see what quakes can be happening in your organization and help put some solves or resources in place. And what I mean when I say looking at data differently is looking really under the hood of what's happening in your population. So we look at things like turnover, open roles, promotions. Those all tell a really interesting story, as well as leaves of absence. So why are people going out on leave? What kind of leaves are they taking? What kind of time away from work are they taking? And what can we see from that and glean from that as far as when it comes from employee engagement and leadership support? All right, so kind of looking at a different analysis tool. So for Persona is a hub tool. So we use this tool every day in the work that we do. So it's with a simple census, we can see deep into all the populations. It really tells us what generations make up your workforce, along with a percentage of each of those generations. And we know that each generation is needing and wanting something different, both at work and at home. Previously, Philip, you asked me about those Gen Zs, right? Like what really makes them tick at home and at work, and what are they looking for, and how can we help them grow through the organization? So when we're thinking about looking at this slide, you can see all the different generations here, right? We think about millennials, for example. So starting families, they're taking care of their pets they got during COVID, they're buying a home, they're prepping for a promotion. Those are things that are important to them both in and out of work. The Gen X's are starting to think about retirement and possibly caregiving for aging parents. And then we think about the baby boomers, they're nearing retirement. They are getting ready to exit the workforce, and they probably have kids that are entering or in college or maybe even exiting college and starting to be in the real world themselves. So how do we support them from all those different things that are happening to them at work? And then we have these Gen Zs, right? We're all learning about them, as I said. In 5 years, they are going to be making up almost a quarter of our workforce. And they are learning about the working world too. So we're learning about them and they're learning about us and how they can fit into this world that we live in. And they're starting their journey through life. So some similarities are starting to appear between the Gen X's and the Gen Z's, which is super interesting to me. And they are more alike than we think. So the Gen X's and the Gen Z's tend to be a little bit quieter when compared to the millennials or the baby boomers in the workforce. So we're thinking, when you think about a Gen Z, they want everything on their phones, behind their computers. They want to kind of shy away from that human interaction. And that really isn't true. They want someone to take them under their wing and show them, explain to them, help them understand and see a path. And this is where mentorship will really shine as the workforce evolves and changes. So besides that, we have all these buckets. So you can see all these different colors on the screen. So it's really talking about how we take the generations in your workforce and put them into buckets. So we have brand new people to your organization. So we have new entrants, we have your skilled hires, we have your mid-career hires, and your late-stage hires. So all these people have been hired within 0 to 1 years, but they're all different age ranges. So they need different things from onboarding, but they also could be getting closer to offboarding than we think. So how do we deal with that, and how do we appease those people and get them truly integrated and engaged in what they're doing? Then we have our transitional talent. This is always my favorite bucket. These are really truly your up and coming leaders. They're the ones that we need to really grasp onto and get that belonging so they continue to move through the workforce and get to that offboarding or tenured talent, as you see in that the big box way over on the right hand side. And in between that, we have the middle. So these are going to be your people who have been with the organization 6 to 10 years. They're the ones that are truly holding it down. They have seen a lot of change. They've seen some shifts. They've seen some shifts in benefits, HR, leadership, all the things have been happening when they've been employed with the organization. And they're shifting in the tenured talents. These are your people who have been there for 10 plus years. They're kind of seen as the founders. They may have been there from the beginning. So when we're thinking about what they're needing and what someone from a new entrant could be needing, no matter what, if they're brand new to the workforce or they're in a late stage hire, there's all kinds of needs and wants, and also so much experience and so many things that you can glean from what's happening with all these different generations and ages and experiences that truly benefit the organization as a whole.
So I love this, Sarah, and you know, having leaders look more deeply at this, I'm assuming is our takeaway, right? We want you to understand, you know, what is going on, like you said, under the hood for your workforce so you can better shape messaging, programs, services.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of tying this all together now. So when we think about all of the things we just talked about, right? We talked about engagement, we talked about retention, we talked about belonging, we talked about leadership support. Now there's kind of a way that we think about those persona-based benefits. So what do we do with all that information? When we understand what makes each bucket and generation tick and what they're needing or wanting without having them to tell us, we make these benefits and resources easy to understand, easy to access, which removes those barriers and stigmas that stick out in our life quakes. And I just lost light, so give me a second here.
We can still see you.
Okay, good. I'm glad. All right, so we're thinking about that from the persona-based. Just how can we put those things into place? These are just what you're seeing on the screen here are some examples of partnerships and vendors that we can utilize and we can move with and put those resources in place and have your people access them and have them be able to access them without having to come and ask, because they want to make sure they can get what they need without having to ask. And that was a really important piece that ties all of this together.
Nice. All right. No, that was excellent. I love that slide. I think it really helps to articulate, you know, your points around like meeting people where they are, and you know, putting things in place that are not just life changing event, you know, life events, but life changing events. All right. So just as we close out this section of organizational and leadership support, and we've leaned hard on this because it's worth 60 points. As you think about some of these, establishing a wellness committee or an ERG is a great way to do this. I'm a member of Hub's Pride Voices and Leslie, the Black Inclusion Network, right? So I think that, you know, those are ways to get people more engaged in something that is super meaningful to them. You know, make sure that you're designing a program that gets employee input, and then looking at employee-friendly like policies that make a lot of sense. We have a list here on screen. I don't know if there's any other, you know, there's a question about best approach to revise leave policies. And I feel like, Sarah, you kind of talked about that on your
Yep.
life quake slide.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So when you're looking at those policies, and if you want to flip back to the life quake slide, you're more than welcome. But yeah, the life quakes are part of leave. The consulting around leave, the thought process around leave, and opening up the policies and procedures around leave definitely fits in here. So it all ties together to what you're talking about, Philip.
Nice. Yeah, and I know some like leave, sort of more creative leave policies like pet bereavement, right? You talked about people adopting pets like during COVID, and I'm one of those people, right? And so certainly, at the point when little Penny leaves us, I'll need a day off at least.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and when you're opening up the language in your policies, and you're opening up the meanings and the definitions of what those words mean, it truly makes an inclusive workforce. And it really helps create that sense of belonging. And you work somewhere that really cares about you, and no matter if you have kids at home, pets at home, your spouse at home, you're single, whatever it is, there's things that are happening to you that you may or may not fit into a bucket like everybody else. So that is a really, really great point.
Agreed. All right. So moving into our next section of programs and program integration, right? We know from the research that evidence-based programs that are targeting known risks are what are going to lead to measurable outcomes, right? But of course, you have to have all those other things that we talked about that make your employees feel good about the organization and then want to, engage in the services that you're offering. You got to have the trust there. So as we tip into this, right, this is a busy slide, lots of colors. The point here and the takeaway is that, and I think it mirrors some things that Sarah and I have talked about in terms of looking into your benefits and perhaps re-articulating them in a way that can resonate with individuals who are looking for things to support them in that moment, right? So you can see pretty long laundry list of things that you may be offering today, or that you might be considering, and how they might fit into some of these different elements that are more holistic, right? Because the humans that you want to engage and to change their behavior, improve their health, might have different things that they care about. And the one sort of call out that might feel like it's an outlier or a little fringy is the spiritual element. And I'll say that I'm in the New England area, and Holy Cross College is a spiritual based, faith-based, university, and they have an amazing wellness program. And so for them, it makes sense to kind of lean into it. And we know there's some more conversation around how spirituality is a component of diversity, equity, inclusion. So, you don't know what's going to land unless you are creating it for your workforce. And then as we move into the next piece, like how do we build this out around existing resources? We talked about that concept, and at Hub we have our Choose Well program and our resource. And so if you're fortunate enough to be a Hub client, you have access to this. And listen, you guys, it's not rocket science. We made a table, but what's cool is we help to pre-populate that table with existing resources. So everything that you see here is something that is free or low cost. And so it really is, we're taking the work out of it for some of our clients. And as you think about planning and then programs and resources, it's really around consistency. And as we talk about the concept of program integration, and you're going to hear more from Leslie later about different programs, I want to just, as you think about that flow, that you want a single point of entry that everyone comes into. It's that administrative platform that's either through your carrier or that you buy online. I know I saw a question around what's a great platform to use, and that someone was using one that I'm familiar with, but that's too big a conversation. I'll say talk to your consultant about that. But the important thing is to just make sure you promote it, that it fits well within your budget. And so when they get people into the portal, they take an assessment. It ideally should triage them into the services that we see or the elements on the left-hand side. Maybe you need a healthy eating program based on your responses. You could be diabetic and need help with your diabetes management, or it's just some nutrition counseling, which is often free through your health plan if you qualify. We talked a little bit about financial wellness, engage in a FinWell program. We have a great resource at Hub FinPath. And then of course, lots of organizations have a 401k or a 403b vendor. And there's usually really smart, helpful people who are happy to talk to you about how you engage in that. I want to share a quick client example. This is a really forward-thinking, thoughtful client of mine, a different one, and they were seeing a lot of mental health concerns. Saw it some in their disability, but what they needed to do is surge resources. And so we have an EAP in place. Of course, they have behavioral telehealth and in-person counseling, and then they brought in a third-party organization to help with mental health counseling. And what you can see here is the results from that. Part of what we did is we implemented a coordination of care model so that people understood where they got into the pool to get support with behavioral health. And then, we were measuring anxiety, depression, and stress. And, what's awesome is if you look at that far right-hand column, the degree of improvement, mid to high 30s. People improved in terms of, their self-reported anxiety, depression, and stress. So just a great example of how you want to make sure to rise those services to the top so that people will engage. And, I'll sort of close this section out to, share a little story from Stone Soup. And for people who aren't familiar with the story, it's two soldiers after the war find themselves in a small village. And the villagers, are leery of them, and resources are scarce, and they don't want to share. And so they concoct this cool story that they can make this amazing soup with just a stone. And then if you remember the story, what happens is they convince people to lend them carrots or some potatoes. The stone soup would be so good if you just added in a little something. And so life is better when we work together, right? Ask your broker and your carriers for help connecting the dots to some of their programs. We always find that there's more that's available through your carrier partners than you know about. I'd say look for the best in people. I think that, we're in a helping profession. And so if you ask, people will show up. And of course, as we know from Stone Soup, there's always more to go around than we believe. All right, participation strategies, right? How do we get people into it, right? It's so much more than incentives. Daniel Kahneman, who's recently passed, said that there's two ways to get people engaged, and we seem to be fixated on pulling people in or bribing them to engage when we forget that there's barriers, whether they're emotional or physical, time-bound, that stop people. So let's just start with a little science, right? This was something that I found at the beginning of the year from the Information and Food Council. What's getting in your way of making good on your good intentions? And a Harris poll wanted to know what's keeping you from making good on your fitness goals. New Year's resolutions, people, that's just a distant memory, but that's what we call the intention behavior gap. Of course, there's a word for it, right? So what does work? Well, FYI, none of those reasons and cash doesn't necessarily lead to it, right? It's monitoring your progress, seeing that what you're doing is paying off. That's why weight management programs want you to step on the scale every day. Habit formation. Weave in those small habits and begin to shift your behavior so you're on autopilot. You don't need a sticky note to remember to brush your teeth at night. You're on autopilot there. Mindset, have the confidence that you can do it. Believe that you're someone who will do those things, who will go to the gym. So interesting, to think about the science of behavior change and realize that communication is super important for this. And at Hub, we have a communications and design team, and there's been elements of communication that we've talked about throughout this. And what you can see from this slide is, you need to create a brand. And if you took anything away from the story of Stone Soup, is that the power of story is super important. Set up a wellness page. Get a video that's going to capture hearts and minds. Everyone's looking at videos on their phones. Take a leaf from, consumer marketing and make sure that you're, using videos, that you're reaching people on a regular basis, And don't over-engineer it, right? Keep it simple. That's important. Even really smart people don't need to stress their brains to think about the stuff that's going to work for them. All right, let's jump into some strategies here for participation strategies. Aligning your workforce and your locations and incentive to the actions, right? Let's have people complete a risk assessment, and instead of giving them $100, give them access to Noom to lose some weight, or Calm to relax their brains, right? Go see your local PCP and maybe get some HSA dollars that you can spend if your report's not so great, right? Complete a state-based tobacco cessation class, right? Get some money through your lifestyle spending account. Never been a tobacco user, but I know that it's rough. So if you do that stuff, you should treat yourself. I want to pause here and turn to Leslie, because I know you've got some great ideas around one of the questions that we had, like reaching hybrid workforces and sort of setting things up that make sense.
Yeah, so when we're trying to reach hybrid workforces, I think it's important to hone in on what you were talking about as far as communication, right? Is using those communication channels that are already available. So things like Slack and Teams channels are a great way to incorporate that hybrid workforce into their own storytelling. People love stories, just like your Stone Soup story, which I enjoy. Other people love to hear from others what's working in this wellness world. We have so many tips and tricks for well-being that we tend to share with each other. Oh, this is the new diet that I've tried and it's worked for me, or this is the new exercise that I've tried that's worked for me, or using things like Noom and Calm. These things work for people. So communicating that through these channels such as Teams and Slack allows those who are not necessarily in the office every day to still have a little bit of cooler time.
Nice. No, I thank you so much. I think that that's a great point. And just a quick note on the bottom one, right? You talked about cooler time, right? If you have like location specific programs that you're doing, right? Like think about like an auto dealer. Like maybe there's 5 or 6 locations for that dealership. And if you work out of one of those locations, that's where you affiliate. And so if you do some great work and you get like 80% participation, like buy a new fancy coffee machine, right? Something for that location. And then every time people see that, they're like, remember we won that step challenge and we got that cool new coffee machine? It's way better than the $50 gift certificate, which maybe you leave in your wallet or you just forget, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
I think that that's super important. Any other thoughts before we move to the next slide?
I think that covers it.
All right. So as we go here and we talked about like engaging supervisors and managers, there's so much about this that's super important. Lincoln Industries is an amazing case study. Make sure that you're creating job expectations. That's part of what Lincoln Industries showed, is that if you weave it into your job expectation, then people care about it, right? It's aligning the incentives. Involve them in the strategic planning and give them a voice, not just a task. And connect it to the population. I think that that's really important aspect of this. I want to see, Sarah, you talked about, managers and millennials kind of growing into those manager roles. Any other thoughts around engaging managers, supervisors?
Yeah, honestly, one of my favorite things to talk about when it comes to managers, supervisors, leaders is having roundtables for them. Let them have peer-to-peer time. Let them hear what works, let them hear what doesn't work, wins and learnings, as I like to call them. So just getting them together and giving them some time to bounce ideas off each other and help build that community within themselves really, truly helps with the well-being for them and then also for anyone who's working under them.
Nice. Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
And then, where we talked a bit more about hybrid workforces, and Leslie had some great ideas around how do you sort of make people feel like they're together on things. When people are flowing through the same door, that provides sort of a unique opportunity to employ behavioral economics, right? Make that healthy choice the easy choice. To design that environment so if you're asking people to lose weight, that maybe you're providing access to a kitchen that has a facility for making a salad. or storing, the lunch that you brought in. I think that that's important. Make it fun, when I talk about don't be afraid to get personal, I think that is more aligned to if you as a leader or as a manager have a great story, share that with people as you're comfortable, because that have a much bigger impact than some generic flyer or email that you send out to everyone. All right, we're going to tip into our final section of measurement and evaluation, right? Critical step if you want to understand if you have real outcomes. And as we think about sort of the steps that we take as we kind of move through the strategic planning process, I'll point out that between 10 and 20% of employers are actually doing any real measurement or evaluation. And that data is from research that is organizations who are taking the time to fill out the scorecard. So they already care enough to do benchmarking, yet they're still sort of not doing a lot of evaluation. So set up your measurable objectives as a start and establish some more granular KPIs as you sort of look at this. And a great example of KPIs, and you're going to hear more from Leslie on this, is like if you're wanting to lower diabetes related cost, then say, I'm going to do that by 5%. Put a metric to it, and that makes more sense. And I'll just, as I come to this slide, right, there's a lot going on here, and in full transparency, I did steal this from our clinical informatics officer, who has set up our data warehouse. And so as we look at the slide and we think about how important it is to overlay workforce well-being, that human-centric culture that Sarah talked about with clinical informatics, that you have to look at the big picture and understand how your benefits weave in to support it, how the communication resources come forward to support that. And so I just want to, we're like in a Jeopardy round here. So, Sarah, is there a bubble that you'd like to speak to before we move on?
Yeah, I think I'm going to pick culture and population health. So that QEX and using data to support all of that. One of the things that we can see when we look at your data and we look at the things like the persona analysis I talked about, we can see things like food deserts and areas with high medical costs that can really impact the cost of living. And it allows us to put resources in place to help employees live better without having to ask. So it really brings us back to the belonging factor and removing those barriers and having resources available for employees to access, and they know how to access them without having to come and ask their employer.
Nice. Yeah, no, great points. And Leslie, how about you? Which one would you select?
If I were to select one, it would be around health tools and resources, because we do have a lot of tools already at our disposal outside of the Hub Infused Analytics platform, right? We've got things like CAP reports, high claimant reports. We even can tap into what Sarah was speaking about as far as organizational support around that leave policy. So when employers or employees are leaving, let's look at that. What are those top reasons? How can we help employees to balance that workload? Is there an opportunity for what we already have access to? Maybe potentially putting aside a set of dollars for that employee when they go on leave. If we have leave policies, maybe another employee has to pick up that work. Could there potentially be bonus available for those employees? So that helps with managing work stress related, and increasing work-life balance.
I love that. Yeah, thank you so much for playing a little round of Jeopardy here. We're going to dig into a case study, and so I'm excited to bring Leslie back and tell us about your case study, please.
Oh, I love this one. So I have a client, Southern Farm Bureau Life Insurance. They're actually located in Jackson, Mississippi, and they're part of the risk services industry. They've got about 650 lives. So in Jackson, Mississippi, we do recognize that there is presents its own set of challenges around social determinants of health. So there's, a lack of access to providers in that area. But as we look at their timeline for where Southern Farms Wellness Program has developed in that next slide, we're able to see that they've moved from a more traditional well-being program that's focused around physical activity to a more whole person integrated well-being program. So in 2008, when their wellness program started, they really had a focus on physical activity, health education content, which was applicable, but only to a certain demographic of their employee base. They were able to use some of their health data tools around claims reports to better curate a program that met the needs for the population. And then this data was able to share, there's a low adherence to primary care visits. Again, that ties into that social determinants of health, where people aren't managing their chronic disease conditions, they're not having their annual physicals. So it made sense for this population to bring care in-house. There was an on-site clinic that's established, and then through that on-site clinic, there's better access to care for employees. There's still a need to manage metabolic disease, weight management, and mental health issues that were leading to the implementation of other solutions that could better manage it for this population. So this is where we're starting to focus on the whole care approach for employees. Now, COVID-19 did present its own set of challenges, specifically taking people out of the workplace. So that on-site clinic, although it's very useful, really resulted in a need for bringing care to people where they were at. So reducing that, increasing care for people, we reduced that cost barrier through telemedicine, so that there's a $0 copay or co-share. Mental health was also a major part of implementing resources for that whole person approach. And so during the completion of their 2021 Hero Scorecard, leadership team decided that it was important to take some measurement around their current progress. So if we move forward a little bit, Philip, here into the next slide, there was already some presenting problems, including, employees not understanding their employment benefits. Maybe there was about 80% of employees who weren't actually accessing their incentives. And when, a lot of barriers were removed for people so that 100% could access incentives. There was still a large prevalence of obesity, cardiometabolic diseases, and employees themselves were actually mentioning how overwhelming their mental health challenges were around stress and burnout. And then managers were starting to notice that there was substance use disorders among their population. So I'd like to look deeper into the presenting opportunity around mental health. So in the next slide here, we'll see that the measurement for employee satisfaction of the well-being program showed that there were high sentiments of employees experiencing stress and burnout. That was around 54% of employees experiencing that. But there was already an EAP program that was in place that was roughly getting about 3% utilization. So during the strategic planning process, it was important to address the metrics around how success could be measured and achieved when implementing a new mental health well-being solution. So this focused on increasing the access to providers for employees through multiple media options. It was also important to address employee-dependent access to care, especially for those who are under the age of 13, and to make sure that there was ample reporting that highlighted the rate of referrals versus the resolution through the EAP program. So at Southern Farm, we were able to discover that after implementing a solution such as BHS, which is positioned as a Better For You EAP program, this group was able to access or increase utilization to 96% in the first year of the program, which is really unheard of for an EAP. And then all the KPIs that were set during the strategic planning meeting were actually exceeded expectations. So this is a really great example of how measurement and evaluation can work in real life to develop programs at every stage of the program. Southern Farm had a great program start that focused on whole person care and developed even more. And so there's always opportunities for growth. Philip, what else do you have for us?
Oh, Leslie, that is an amazing case study. I love how you really just sort of brought everything that we've talked about together, right? Just in terms of all of those key elements, how thoughtful and strategic this client work was to identify not only what the employees were saying and feeling and needed, but what the data was telling us.
Yes.
So love that. You know, I think that we're just about at time here. And so, you know, as we round up, really, I think that just to conclude, right, we're here to improve health and well-being, and it takes more than programs and incentives, right? We want to help people. That's our goal. It's important to understand that the health choices are really personal, and that some of those changes are really hard. I mean, you know, Leslie, your case study helped to identify real struggles for real people, and then provide solutions that were so well focused on them. And it also helped to highlight, you know, the impact of social determinants. You know, like, you know, COVID is our favorite social determinant to go back to, but a lot of those things are really still alive and well as we think about where people are struggling economically. You know, I guess I'll share, you know, that life can feel hard, but it's also pretty amazing. And so if you sort of lean into the idea of thriving, that there's an opportunity to really lift people up, and that those great well-being initiatives, if you strategize them correctly, right? If you have the right data elements, and if you don't over-engineer it, you know, you can create real success at scale and create some real outcomes. So that concludes our time together. And I want to thank Leslie and Sarah for joining me. It's such an honor and pleasure to present with you guys. And so on behalf of Hub International, thank you for attending our webinar today. And if we didn't address your specific question in the Q&A or during the presentation, please pass them along to a Hub representative. We'll make sure to follow up with you. And for those in attendance, continuing education credits will be provided, and a follow-up email along with a link to the replay of the webinar and a PDF of our slides. And as a reminder, please fill out the survey before closing your browser. The feedback will help us to be better next time. And this concludes our broadcast. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.